Jeb Blount.
All righty.
But, we've got a few more minutes before we go live here. What do you think of Sarah Cooper?
She's funny.
Sorry, we are live. We got a few minutes before we record. We are live streaming now. Listen.
I think she's very funny. Whenever I see her stuff, it really strikes me as like the fleeting nature of the internet is like really obvious when you see it. Because yeah, she made this funny thing, but I keep wondering when I see her.
What's the future? What's the roadmap?
Yeah. What's Act 2, right?
Yeah.
Just like, Jon Stewart couldn't make a career just mocking George Bush. He had to then figure out, what do we find out or focus on that's absurd about Barack Obama?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it's funny, but I'm interested to see what comes after this.
Yeah, me too. Do you ever worry about yourself, about that, like the longevity of your career?
Not really, actually.
Nice.
Not for that reason. Not because I'm focused on a fleeting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I spend more time thinking about is what is the best way to apply my talent and passion. And I don't know if it's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're live here, so I'll share that with everybody. Email me if you want to know what I mean by that.
So you have 15 seconds. What's an upgrade for the usage of your talent and passion?
I think just tackling bigger questions. Like we were talking off air about, I think news and politics. I think my talent is breaking down complicated things and explaining them to people in ways that are clear and easy to understand. Mm-hmm. Sort of take the veneer of exclusivity off of it. I was reading this article in The Hill all about the Fed and their bond buying program, which we were talking about off air. And I just thought it was so hilarious. Like they try to make it seem like it's so inaccessible and impossible for anybody to understand.
Right.
And it's really not. It's actually not that complicated. It's unnecessarily complicated. And I think that might be a better use of my time is working on these really bigger, more impactful questions.
Are you subscribed to Matt Levine's email list? I mean, it's Bloomberg's email list, I suppose, but his column on Bloomberg.
I'm not. I have read it before. Money Stuff, it's called. And I love his writing.
Yeah.
And I am subscribed to a guy who's now on Substack, but was a Rolling Stone writer for years, Matt Taibbi, who's definitely more flamboyant with his pen than Matt Levine, but has that sort of I'll explain complicated things and hey, they're just trying to distract you from what's really going on. That's kind of my style. I love his post today was "We has decided to make money" in reference to the WeWork company.
Yeah.
Great headline.
All right. I just turned on audio hijack. I'm curious if you can still hear me.
I can still hear you.
That's so great.
I'm glad. And I guess I should turn on my audio hijack so I can record my side of the conversation.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're recording the important side here, so.
Which is you. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
You got it, my man.
Okay.
Well, I guess we're all set up to record a podcast here, and we're also live streaming it because I have to try these things.
Yeah, because why the fuck not, Philip? Philip Morgan.
Listen, Witherill. How you doing, my
Is
man?
that what you were waiting? Is that what you were waiting for me to start the podcast?
Well, I figured I'd give you the first mover advantage. You're going to need it. I've got
Oh, am
some
I?
tough questions lined up for you today.
Okay, I'm ready. Now, have you listened to the Run the Jewels album? I don't. Maybe we talked about this briefly on the podcast.
So I feel so bad when you ask that. I listened to it once and I
Uh huh.
thought this is a solid album, especially,
Mm-hmm.
these days in the world of hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't listened to it again. Part of it's just been because my mood lately has been more of this indie rock mood and
Mm-hmm.
less of a hip hop mood.
Okay.
So I haven't. You expressed some initial, what's the word? Is disappointment too
Underwhelmed?
strong? Underwhelm?
No. Yeah, not disappointment, but
Okay.
underwhelmed,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why?
So I've heard a lot of people describe art as you want people to love it or hate it, but you really don't want to land in between those two poles.
Hmm.
And I guess it just didn't. There was nothing about it that felt fresh or different, or I don't need it to be revelatory in any sense, but I don't know. It just didn't move me as much as the past efforts. And actually, the second album to me was by far the best,
Mm.
and the third one was a little bit of a miss, and this one was more of a miss, in my opinion.
It's interesting because the unit of measurement is the album, right? Like if music was released as a continuous, drip, drip, drip of singles, or if albums were not considered albums unless they had 50 songs on them,
Hmm.
we'd be looking at this differently. Have your music taste changed? Is that part of what's different here?
No, I sort of feel like the old guy who still thinks the music that came out around the time I was in high school or in college is still the best music that's ever going to be made.
Yeah.
And I say that half jokingly, but
Yeah.
it's partially true and it's partially a joke. I don't know what the hell the kids are listening to these days. So no, I don't think it's that my music tastes have changed that much, but I do expect to hear some growth. I'd also point out that I think you're right, which is not a lot of people think in terms of albums anymore. Like my sister, I don't know that she's ever bought an album. She buys singles on iTunes, and that's how she grew up.
Yeah, if you listen to Bob or read Bob Lefsetz, he'll talk about how people, I don't know where he's coming from exactly with this, but how people hated paying whatever a CD cost, 16, 18 bucks, I think at the height of the CD heyday, for like one good song. And so, from that perspective, it's it's like this big improvement that you can just, just consume at the song level rather than the album level. And maybe if that's how we were used to thinking about it, we're not. We're old.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a totally different medium now
Yeah.
because when I think of an album like Pink Floyd The Wall or the Beatles Yellow Submarine
Yeah.
or more recently um, some of the Roots albums or Talib Kweli and DJ High Tech Train of Thought, it takes an hour or more to tell that story. And you can't, what you can do in an hour is just very different than what you can do. And now songs are going back to like 2 minutes.
I know, but
It's
if you're
just like,
judged on a per song basis, and then people create their own like experience of you, and maybe they think you're amazing even though the last quote unquote album sucked.
right.
Or they do what I do very often, which is go to Spotify and just listen to the most streamed songs from an artist when
Yeah.
they're sort of sampling that artist.
That's what I do too. Is
Yeah.
like, I'm like, what do other people think is good?
Yeah.
And I'll start there.
Listen, who is Jeb Blount? I mean, I looked at his website for 2 seconds, but I don't know. Who's Jeb
Oh,
Blount? And,
actually, okay, hold on, hold on. So
okay.
now tell me, what did you glean from his website? I'm interested. What do you think Jeb Blunt does, or who do you think he is?
He's a sales guy, I think.
Okay.
I mean, that was the level of depth that I got into it. Not
Yeah,
much.
so you're right. So Jeb Blunt is the creator of salesgravy.com, which is a sales training business. He's also the author of a very successful author of many different sales books. And he has, I learned after talking to him, a very successful training business where he has, I don't know, like 50 or 60 employees, something like that, which I did not know at the time.
With the books, are we talking like New York Times bestseller levels of credibility, or more of a like kind of a niche self-published approach, or what do you
No,
know?
I think he has major publishers. Let's take a look at that. I believe that, okay, Wiley, it looks like is his main imprint. So yeah, Fanatical Prospecting, I think, is his most popular book. That has 996 Amazon reviews, and yeah, it was published by Wiley. Um, he has two other books with over 100. Oh no, sorry, three other books with over 100 reviews. He's very prolific, actually. I'm looking
Hmm.
now.
Have you read any? I guess you have not read any of his books, though.
That's not true. So he was on, my podcast, which is why we're talking about this. And I read his most recent book called Inked, which is about negotiation. Like what are the things you could do to finalize a sale?
Mm-hmm.
I have also read Fanatical Prospecting.
Hmm.
So
Okay, got it.
he has a box set that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 titles in it, which is impressive.
How long has he been doing what he does?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm looking for the release date of Fanatical Prospecting, which was 2015. Um, my guess is probably 10 to 20 years, something like that. But
Okay.
he seems to really, one thing that was immediately impressive to me is he seems to really have the delegation and the team side of it dialed in
Mm-hmm.
to enable him to produce this amount. So, he's already written a book on virtual selling that's 80,000 words, which he started when COVID started. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So we bring up Jeb Blount because you interviewed him for Modern Sales, and then we talked not long after that, and you were super impressed with the dude. Why?
So I was, um, gosh, I hope I don't offend him at all, because I thought, first of all, he was immediately very nice, seemed to know what he was talking about.
Hmm.
But I'm going to be kind of crass in the way I sum this up. He just really had his shit together.
Yeah.
So he was, first of all, first impression is he's in a professional studio. I mean, close to what you would expect from like your local news station. He's got a podium. He's got a big screen behind him. He has his logo, professional lighting, up lighting, down lighting, back lighting, front lighting. He has a producer flipping the camera angle occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's standing at the podium, and so that was the first thing, is
Yeah.
the pro setup. I thought was really, it just obviously visually separated him. And at
But
one point,
can I stop you right here? So
you may.
I feel like there's this line, and it's different for different people depending on what they do. You go beyond that line, and it looks like you're really, wow, you really worked at that professional, video setup.
Yeah.
And then you stop just short of it, and it's like people don't quite notice it at the same level, but it still has the same effect of like, wow, you look great, you sound great. When I think of what I've seen of Christo, which is not much, he's like gone beyond that line, or he's gone beyond where that line would be for like a consultant, and he's now in the like I'm an internet personality territory with how he shows up online. And I'm curious if like how you parse that with Jeb Blount.
Yeah, I mean, it was the quality of a well-produced like internet show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
which is kind of the what I would describe Chris Do as well.
Yeah.
I mean, when you watch his interviews, great lighting, great sound, multiple angles,
Yeah.
often in a professional studio. Like I've seen, he's had videos where he does kind of a quote unquote classroom setting, but of course it's incredibly staged, just as like Creative Live would be.
Right.
But you can see him at the board and there's people asking questions, and it looks like something you would view maybe even on Netflix. It's just like it happens to be business related content. But think about it, just switch the subject. And if Chris Do was talking about doing like focus groups for political questions, it would look the part. And I thought that Jeb Blount was exactly on that same kind of wavelength in terms of how professional it was.
Cool. I interrupted. Please continue.
So that was the first thing I noticed. The next thing is I asked what I wanted to focus on. So he has this book about negotiation. It's called Inked.
Okay.
And whenever I have an author, I like to choose one small part of the book and focus on that and dive a little bit deeper so that I don't get their like canned, here's the 30 minutes of stuff I say about the book every single time. I don't want that. And so I chose this bit about planning for negotiation, which is, I think, 1 or 2 chapters in his book. And the book is like, 35 chapters or something. So the chapters are pretty short. And it was not a conversation. I mean, he was like just firing, like he was like, oh yeah, that, okay, hold on. Let me go get my board. Right. And so he goes and gets a flip chart and he's like drawing pictures on the flip chart. And I think,
wait, hold up. So this is an audio podcast, but he's like in full video mode.
Okay. So here's another thing. So back to the professionalism, right?
Yeah.
When we started, he goes, oh, okay. So what do you want to talk about today? And I said, well, initially I reached out to you about Inked. And I said, but since all this COVID stuff, I thought maybe remote selling.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I'm writing a book on remote selling. And I was like, okay. Right. And so I said, well, what if we had 2 shorter conversations and I published them as separate podcast episodes? And he's like, great. And he goes, hold on. And so he goes and he gets his copy of Inked and he sets it on the desk. And I said, Jeb, really nice of you to do that, but I'm not publishing the video. He goes, oh, why not? And I said, that's a larger conversation. I don't think we have time to have it.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I tell you what, just record it and send it to me and I'll publish it.
Wow.
Right. And I said, well,
I'm saying wow because he's just so able to go with whatever you're throwing at him.
Totally. Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh yeah, I have someone who will do that. Don't send it to me. My team they'll cut it up. They'll put it into separate episodes and then we'll mention you whenever we put it up.
Wow.
And I was like, boy, do I feel like a loser right now, So, I think that was just surprising because I've never interacted with someone who was just like totally unfazed by everything and had an answer for everything. So we started recording the first episode, which was all about negotiation and in particular negotiation planning, which I'm thinking, well, this is like, 1/20th of his book. We'll just have kind of a conversation about this. But man, I asked one question and I'm pretty sure he didn't stop talking for like 10 minutes.
How did that feel? Like you're not used to that. You're used to being a pretty activist podcast host, interrupting people, steering the conversation, right?
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. I
try to be an interviewer. I don't particularly like podcast hosts who constantly feel the need to assert themselves.
Okay.
Because I just think something's lost. So I'll give you an example, right? If Joe Rogan is talking to Hannibal Buress, another comedian, it's going to be banter for 2 or 3 hours and they're just going to be riffing on each other.
Yeah.
But if he's talking he had this woman on, Barbara Fries, I think is her name, and she published a book about corporate denial, which is a fascinating topic. He basically asked questions and then she talked, right? And then he'd kind of steer the conversation that way. That's more my style on Modern Sales. But I will say it felt a little incongruent or disproportionate that he was talking so long
Yeah.
without. And trust me, I was looking for times to jump in,
Yeah.
but he was also talking a mile a minute,
Yeah.
which is not a bad thing. I think the main point I'm trying to make is he just knew what to say already. He had the answers. If he was in a corporate training and someone said, how do I plan for a negotiation? He would have been like, I'm glad you asked, right? And went off on this whole same thing. And it was like that together, where it felt like this is an enterprise corporate level thing. Now, and so he's like drawing pictures. He's got diagrams. I mean, he's just on it. Like he just has, it was just striking how, what's the word? I guess just professional it seemed.
Yeah.
Now, I don't agree with everything he said.
Yeah.
In fact, I disagree with a lot of things he said, and I think he left out some bigger meta themes, like, should we negotiate? It's like a question that I would ask.
Right.
Right? Like, do you even want to do that in your business? And like, how do you think about that? And to be fair, that wasn't the topic. It was, how do I plan for a negotiation if I have one coming up? But I was very blown away by how sort of precise he was the whole way through.
Where do you, I mean, did you ask him? Did you say like, dude, this was amazing. How are you so good at this? Or do you have speculation? I'll add, like, one of the things that I have said a lot is, like, writing is often the practice for making a point in a conversation, with a prospect or a client or in a consulting situation or whatever. So I feel like that's one way you get to that level, is writing about these ideas a lot. It sounds like he does write a lot. Why do you think he was so polished?
Well, I think a couple things. I think he does write a lot. So I agree with you. So as fate has it, unrelated to this podcast today, I published an article on my site about how to become a podcast guest. Like, how do you pitch yourself? What do you do when you go on? And I had a section in there, how to be a great guest. And what I've noticed is better guests tend to write on a regular basis.
Okay.
Even if they go on a lot of podcasts, what I find is, and for me too, if someone asks me a question about something I've already written about, I'm going to sound over the top articulate about it.
Yeah.
And it's simply because I've already taken the time to sort through, how do I think about this? What major points do I think are relevant to make? And how do they all tie together? And so I think clearly writing is a really big part of it. And I'd be hard pressed to find someone who's a really adept speaker who isn't just charismatic or entertaining, but has substance, which is another topic for another time,
right?
Who doesn't write, right? Like, I think I could not understand how someone could have a density of communication that's impressive, like Scott Galloway's clip on Anderson Cooper and Sanjay Gupta. So he gives this whole rant about, not rant, actually, that's the wrong word. He gives an impressively logical and structured argument about why higher education is going to be totally disrupted, and it's being accelerated by COVID.
Right.
And just how lucid and cogent that argument is incredibly impressive to do in 5 minutes. I mean, Anderson Cooper looked dumbfounded. I don't think Sanjay Gupta said more than 10 words the whole time, which you're not used to seeing from talking heads on the news. Now, just to apply your question about Jeb to Scott Galloway, by the way, I'm on a first name basis with all these people.
Of course.
Obviously.
Yeah.
How does Scott Galloway become that good or that sharp? Well, I think the answer is doing it for 10 or 20 years is like, you can't discount the value of that, because how many times has he written about or made an argument about higher education? And my guess is 20 to 50 at least.
Yeah, I watched that clip afterwards, and I think it's taking away a little bit from him to say, well, he was weaving together in a sort of a live setting things that he's written. Like that kind of diminishes the art of the weaving together in a live situation. Like there's an art to that. I think. Trying to think. Are you someone who's?
I disagree with you. Go ahead.
Someone else interviewed someone. Oh yeah, yeah. We'll talk about that. But like, it's not like he's reading, from his book on the podcast.
Well,
he's
so
not doing
let's put it
that.
this way.
But
okay, so one of our favorite topics on here is hip hop, and one of the things that you and I both recommend is Black Thought's 11-minute freestyle on Funkmaster Flex.
Right.
Well, it's not as if Black Thought is reading that, but he said before, he's like, if you ever want to be able to do what I did, you have to write. And so those rhymes were committed to memory. Separately, separate skill, how do I do that for 11 minutes uninterrupted without ever making a mistake? That's a different skill, right? But you can't have one without the other. And I think that's what I would say about Scott Galloway is like the substance of the argument was not devised on the spot. The way he said it and the way he connected everything, maybe it was the first time it came out exactly like that, but basically the content was there and he had to deliver it.
Yeah, and I think we're largely agreeing. I'm saying that the delivery of the content is also important. Like you could do really good at the writing part and then suck at the delivery part because you're switching from one context to another. You're switching from this writing context where you have all this time and then you're switching into this live context, live TV. I don't know if it is anymore, but I think you get what
and
I'm
also,
saying.
With Scott Galloway, or you mentioned Matt Levine early on, or Matt Taibbi, this article or this journalist who I've been following a lot lately, whose writing is incredible. Another thing to mention is there's the substance of what they're saying. The argument, the quality of the argument, how it all comes together, how they tie disparate ideas. But then there's also the style, which I think is why we like those three writers. I know it's why you like Matt Levine.
He's funny.
Because he's funny.
But
right?
in this dry, snarky's not, but yeah, he's a particular kind of funny.
Well, and Scott Galloway too. I mean, here's a historically extremely dry topic, and we both like Ben Thompson, but pretty dry writing. But they write about the same things, which is business strategy, particular tech strategy. And Scott Galloway's style is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. I fear that listeners might think we're saying you have to be as good as these people to get on a podcast.
You don't.
And I don't think that's it at all. But maybe we can wind up with like what, because I feel like the value of talking about these folks, dissecting these examples, interrupting myself for a second. I love pointing people to this particular interview that Howard Stern did with Madonna of this really example of just like artful interviewing where, he's somewhat activist in managing the interview, but he's not overshadowing her at all. He's talking about himself, but he's not doing what Tim Ferriss does, which is kind of make it all about himself. And he's just walking that line so artfully. So I think we can learn from these people who are better than we are. What do you think we can learn from them? Maybe that's our takeaway here.
So here's what I think I captured this in the article that I posted to my site today.
Yeah.
I think the main thing is so I agree with you. The goal isn't to be Jeb or to be Scott or to be Howard Stern or to be Madonna.
Yeah.
The goal is what's one thing I can take away from this so that I can be better at my craft. And I think for me, the obvious thing is if you're going to be a podcast guest and you want to be a memorable one and you want to be one that's going to, impress the host, which is also important, you got to show up prepared. And I think that there's nothing that Jeb did to specially prepare for my podcast. I don't know that for a fact. I didn't ask him. But my guess is he could have done this on any podcast. He could have had another one immediately after and done the same thing.
Right.
Maybe on one of his other books.
It wasn't some
Uh,
special unicorn moment of brilliance for him. He has
no,
prepared to perform at this level.
it was just like pure. Yes, exactly. It was
Hmm.
like professional performance.
Yeah.
And I feel that if you don't write and you're self-employed, boy, is it going to be hard for you to do any sort of lead gen. So if you're not going to make it strictly on referrals, I really think you need to be able to write, which seems like a counterintuitive takeaway when we started out talking about podcasting. But
Oh,
I think it makes
you know I love that this turned into really turned into a podcast about writing. You know I
well,
love that.
I think writing makes you just sharper on all of your opinions, on all of your arguments.
Yeah.
And, if you want to differentiate yourself from the marketplace, one of the ways to do that is through ideas. And
Yeah.
if you can convey good ideas in a cogent way, then that's going to go a long way for you.
It sounds like a dumb question, but I think maybe it's not. Why does impressing the host matter?
Well, you probably want to get asked back. That would be good to always have the option of going back on. I think also there's a variety of things that can happen after the podcast that are good for you that the host doesn't have to do. A link back to your site,
Hmm.
marketing it to their email list, marketing it to their social media. If you ever want to call in a favor, have them on your podcast, get them to write a blurb for your book, all kinds of other reasons. So, I think instead of looking at it as a one-time transaction, it's good to show up and be interesting,
Yeah.
and really show that you care about delivering something valuable to them and to their audience.
I will add two things, and then we'll wrap up. One is that I've gotten some of the same kind of benefits you're talking about from being a really good host, a good interviewer, and doing that side of it as well. So I think it works both ways.
Hmm.
The second thing is my favorite tip with interviewing authors is wait until their book's been out, about which might be hard with this Jeb Blount guy because he's probably releasing a book every 6 months. But wait 6 months until after their book is out and approach them for an interview. Then you can ask them about anything other than the book, and they will probably eagerly say yes because they're humans. They're not machines. They've gotten sick of talking about their book at that point because
Right.
they've talked endlessly about it. So you have this window of opportunity to say, hey, want to talk about this other weird thing? Um, if I wanted to interview Ryan Holiday, I would wait till he releases a book, wait 6 months, and then ask him about this parenting email list that he's doing or he's involved in some way, for as an example of that.
Yeah.
Liston, it was great talking to you, my man.
It was great to talk to you, and it was great to be live streamed. Thank you, Philip.
Feels special. Feels all tingly, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
Bye. The live stream's running so people know that when we say bye, we're still on the call. But I'm going to end the live stream also.